Hi, Sean Smith here again, trying to help us think about hybrid, blended, and fully online learning, particularly for the home environment. So I've been offering some tips, and today I want to focus in on Learning Coach or the Learning Coach. Now, the Learning Coach is something that is part of the vernacular for fully online learning for well over a decade, if not longer. And in a way, we can think of this in the hybrid and blended learning as well. But we have the role of a teacher. And what is our role, or what is our role as educators? Well, we're the instructor. We determine the curriculum, we determine the lesson, we determine the goals, the benchmarks, how we assess. We determine the methods of how we're going to get there, the materials, and of course, overall, the direction of the individual. Now, in the face-to-face role, we often have assistants in the room. They could be a paraeducator, they could be an aide, they could be someone helping us implement things like MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, and a host of other things. And oftentimes, in the face-to-face environment, the parent is very secondary. We may connect with them on a periodic basis, be it 3 times a year, 4 times a year. And we update them about our energies and what we've been doing, and we kind of share with them our philosophy and what we'll be doing. And maybe ask them of homework and some guides and make sure that your child gets enough sleep and a host of other things. But in a blended and hybrid or fully online, the parent has a role. The parent has a role that very well could take on an aide, they could take on a tutor, they could take on much more. But to begin with, before we get into the specifics, what I want to do is reinforce the fact that the learning coach idea has been key to successful fully online and to a level hybrid blended learning for well over a decade. This well precedes the pandemic. Now, when I say this, I'm not saying the parent at home, the family member at home, is the educator. No, we as educators are the educator. But the family member at home during the blended or hybrid or fully online, they're our eyes and ears. They're noticing what's happening prior to a lesson that they're engaged in, prior to coming online live with us. They know what the weekend looked like. They know what the evening looked like, the morning looked like. They know what's happening in terms of things that are taking place in terms of distractions and connections, things that normally in a face-to-face environment we're aware of. We'll see it within a few minutes. We'll be asking some questions. Oh, how did the week go? Oh, you were at grandma's house last night. When did you get back? Oh, you got back at 11 o'clock last night, and it's 8 o'clock this morning. No wonder you're tired. Things of that nature. And so anyways, they are our eyes and ears. And so how do we engage them? Now, during the pandemic, during the final 3 months of school, or however many months of school it was where you were experiencing the pandemic, the question I'd be asking you is, who served in the role of this adult at home? Who served in the role of what we would refer to as a learning coach? Now, I'm going to get into some specific attributes of the learning coach in just a moment, but just be reflecting is who was the person? How did you use them? How successful was it? What was their communication back to you? What was your communication with them? The list of things goes on. Now, with that said, I want to make sure and emphasize the fact that learning coaches have been a terminology used by fully online schools for years. So content management systems like K-12 Incorporated, Connections Academy, even Khan Academy and others, they would actually refer to the adult at home as a parent, as a learning coach. They'll have roles and expectations for the learning coach. They generally will have some sort of contract the adult at home prior to the pandemic would sign and agree to. They would have a tutorial and a guide for the learning coach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I emphasize this and mention this because of the fact that if we're going to go hybrid, blended, or fully online, and we're going to ignore the fact that the parent exists, or we're going to basically look to the parent and say, okay, this is your role, and go to it. Wait a minute here, the bicycle's been invented, the wheel's been invented. Let's learn from the past, prior to the pandemic, about how folks engaged the learning coach, how they empowered them, what roles they expected of them, how they facilitated that. Now, I'm not saying that's how we're going to engage going forward. Now, why? Why, Sean? Well, a couple points. First of all, these roles I'm about to share in terms of the learning coach, this was with a parent making the choice to go fully online, or there was some sort of decision making. The brick and mortar or the face-to-face was an option prior to the pandemic. Now, for some of us fully online right now, this is not a choice for the family member at home. They have other obligations. So we need to, one, look to the past to be aware of how they were used to be successful. The fact that, wait, this may not be the reality going forward, but we may be able to mix a little, we may be able to at least learn about what worked and go from there. So first of all, they were a communicator, and they communicated with us. It may be email. It may be the mail that we offer, the web mail offered within Google Classroom. Well, it comes through Gmail, but it's connected through when I sign into Google Classroom. It may be announcements. It may be the phone calls or returning phone calls. That's a bit of an expectation. And so that's a level of us as educators, how we share information out to parents, how we empower them to let them know this is the type of information we're going to share, how we avoid the 7-page email or the 5 or the 2-page email. Instead, how do we break information up to make sure that they see this is very relevant, they're able to connect, they're able to comprehend and translate. And oh, by the way, the video conferencing is starred because although that seems to be the relationship that we've now kind of employed since the pandemic, prior to the pandemic, video conferencing was not the mode of home communication, home school communication, or school home communication. Instead, it was phone call, email, web mail, announcements, etc. Not to say we can't use video conferencing, just want to reinforce prior. They're the organizer-in-chief, and I talk about this in another a few minutes in terms of an update on a tip. But overall, they are the ones with our guidance. We need to be able to provide that support, but they're determining the dedicated space for learning. They're the ones that are making sure that the device is working, the Wi-Fi is working, it's connected. That's the expectation of the learning coach. They're the ones that are previewing potentially lessons, any messages, any reviews, any things that the child should be focused in on. And of course, they're monitoring and restricting for distractions and things of that nature. They're also the master scheduler. Well, no, Sean, I am. I'm the educator. Well, no, they need to preview and review the schedule. They need to determine what's changing for the day or the week. They need to plan when the child's going to complete it. Well, they're going to complete it today. Well, actually, if we plan for some of our fully online lessons, it may be that we give them 3 or 4 days to complete a series of lessons. Well, okay, Wednesday afternoon is a great time. We're going to be able to focus. I'm going to be able to be there to support you. I'm taking some time off of work or my telemarketing work, my remote work. I'm able to step away and work a little bit more Wednesday evening. So we're going to focus in on this time. This is our schedule. This is our plan. Of course, we'll work throughout the week, but that might be a targeted time, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, some of the parents I know that did fully online learning with their children prior to the pandemic, they would find that if they organized and scheduled, they would actually be able to support their child and they'd be able to be done with lessons that might be planned for a full day in half the time because they're not having to deal with the classroom organization. They're not having to deal with some of the challenges that often prevent us face-to-face to facilitate this. They were able to be much more efficient and effective with their time. The other thing, they may have to readjust their schedule, readjust the plan. Oh, you need a video conference at this time? Okay, then I need to make sure, which gets back into this attendant. I like that. It's my name, attendant. But if you watch I am having trouble with words, aren't I? If you watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the principal, of course, was trying to catch him in terms of his attendance. Well, of course, we're not trying to catch our child with our attendance, but we need to record the number of hours. Kansas right now is asking parents, as they are fully online, to record the 360 minutes per day. What? Yes, parents are having to log that in, facilitate that. They are the ones determining the attendance. They need to make sure that they complete the lessons, that they need to make sure that the child is supposed to be online, they're online. If the camera's supposed to be online, the camera's online. If the camera's on, the list goes on. So these are some expectations that parents are expected to do under this idea of a learning coach. Yes, there is more, okay? They're also kind of the chief grader, or not necessarily grader, but monitoring grades. So they support the child through these guides, these learning coach guides that often come with the lessons. And that's something we need to consider. How do we empower, and I'm going to talk about this in another visit with you, but how do we empower the parent in a meaningful way to aid their son or daughter? It might be through some guides that we create. It might be through some steps and directions that we provide the parents that are supporting their child at home. These coaching guides, as K-12 Incorporated or Connections Academy prior to the pandemic would call them. They're going to monitor for comprehension. Any challenges, they'll email the teacher. They may call the teacher saying, hey, we're seeing some challenges here. We're seeing some barriers. What do you suggest? What strategies do you suggest? Oh, you mean you want me to try these strategies with my son or daughter? Exactly. All right. Also, overall, the learning coach covers a number of different ideas. Everything from, I said, to assist with lessons all the way down to monitor and restrict for distraction. So the learning coach has a lot of responsibility. Now that is in case, now again, with the fully online prior to the pandemic, what we need to do is on that list of things that have worked with a learning coach, we need to determine what are we going to ask the parent to do? What are we going to ask the adult in the home to do? And with that, how are we going to support them? I'm not simply saying, oh no, here, this is what they did before, this is what we need to do again. Remember, this was voluntary prior to the pandemic. This is now required because of the pandemic. But again, look at some of these ideas. Look at how the parent, the adult in the home was utilized. Look how it was successful, and then potentially grab and take advantage of some of those ideas. Now, just to kind of reinforce this, prior to the pandemic, fall of 2019, okay? K-5 online classrooms, the expectation for the learning coach. You want to guess? On average, the number of hours per day that teachers or educators of the online school is expecting parents to be engaged with their child? At the elementary level, average 4 to 6 hours a day. Middle school, 2 to 4. Yeah, that's not happening with the pandemic. I'm just letting you know how powerful that role of the parent was, and therefore understanding some of those components and building upon those. Now, the big question for us going forward, what are we going to ask for? We're going to ask them to make sure that they simply are assigning and organizing a distraction-free learning space. That might be huge right there. We're going to ask them to make sure that they respond to emails. Huge. Are we going to ask to make sure that they look at their emails, return the phone calls when we want to reach out to them? Again, huge. Those things in and of themselves may be huge. Just that communication and making sure the child is in a space where they can actually operate fairly independently. That may be huge for them and huge for us in terms of our education. So these are critical steps. So as we go forward and trying to support the learning coach, and I am having trouble with words, I apologize. Let's think about how we can schedule the day for them, chunking, breaks, things of that nature. Let's think about how we can empower them. I'll talk about that in another session. Let's think about how we can reinforce and identify the big ideas for the educator, for the parents that we're working with, so they understand what to concentrate on or reinforce or enhance. And then overall, communicate. And it may not be communicating, do this, communicating, do that, but rather, this is what I'm doing. This is where we're at. This is where your child's at. This is the expectation for this week. This is how we're going to do it, etc., etc. This is for blended, hybrid, fully online, and in my opinion, even when we go back to face, these are good things to do to further engage the family member at home so they can potentially further support through just homework, through organization, through making sure they get enough sleep, and everything else that comes along with it. Hope this was helpful, and we'll give you some more here very shortly.